So now that we've covered some general characteristics of fungi, we've covered where they come from, their origin, their evolutionary history, we're now going to get into a big part of fungi's capabilities. The reason why fungi are successful, the reason why fungi are able to do what they do. Besides the fact that they have this absorptive nature, they have a very distinct class of body structures that really helps them do what they do best, and that's absorption. And we're going to get into that in the next couple of flowcharts. The first one, which we'll entitle Body Structure 1. So again, in biology, structure and function intimately related to each other, and so each of which give each other a very defining characteristic. Structure and function will play a big role throughout Bio 2, and so we'll get into that with the fungi specifically. So, what do we need to understand about fungi body structure? First and foremost, let's classify the two types of general cellularity, and that is mostly is going to be multicellular. So we've mentioned this before, mostly multicellular, so we'll say multicellular mostly. So in terms of cellularity, essentially is what we're talking about right now. But there are some unicellular fungi, and the one that is of interest to us would be yeast. Yeast are things that most people know about, very important, commercial importance at least, and these are the fungi that are classified as unicellular. So definitely remember the fact that yeast are the unicellular exceptions to this multicellularity, usually the norm in terms of fungi body structure. So now let's cover this multicellular concept, because there's a lot to cover in terms of what makes something multicellular, what makes fungi multicellular. So let's do that as a subtitle right over here, this multicellularity. So because of this multicellular body structure, we get some consequences. We get some specialization specifically. So what do I mean by this? First and foremost, the number one thing to understand about a fungi's body structure is the fact that they have something called hyphae. Okay? Hypha is the singular and hyphae is the plural. What are hyphae? Hyphae are the following. Hyphae, think of these as the basic building block of the body, of the fungi body. It's the basic building block. So let's write that down. Basic building block of fungi body. And of course, this makes sense because we're talking about the body structure. The multicellular structure consists of a ton of hyphae. This is a small building block, functional unit of how fungi structure works. Now, specifically about the hyphae, understand the following. Hyphae are typically long, branched, and thread-like filaments. So they're long, they're branched, and they're thread-like filaments. I'll give you a figure to refer to just so that you can visualize this. Thread-like filaments. Long, branched, thread-like filaments, general structure. They have a quite tubular cell walls as well, so we'll write that down. Tubular cell walls, and remember what's within fungi cell walls? That's that chitin, the nitrogen-containing polysaccharide, within their cell walls. And also, the hyphae are going to be an incredibly important part of a fungi because this is where we have this grow and secrete. They secrete something very important to their whole life structure, enzymes, right? Those hydrolases. Let's classify these enzymes as hydrolases. Those hydrolytic enzymes, they grow and secrete from the hyphae structure. And what hyphae do is, fungi do this very well. They constantly expand themselves. They constantly grow more hyphae, try to expand their reach. And in order for this to happen, they grow more hyphae. If you grow more hyphae, you have more ability to secrete enzymes. Thus, you have more ability to get food. So this is going to be classified as the ability to expand into new food resources. Okay, so how can fungi continue to grow and be successful? Make more hyphae. This is our basic building block. Continue to grow, basically. That's what hyphae are there for. It's a basic functional unit to remember because of the fact that this is where we have this enzymatic release, this enzymatic secretion of hydrolases to break down food. We continue to expand our capabilities through this process. Now, there are specific types of hyphae also to remember, and we'll do that down here. What are the types of hyphae that are of importance to us? Types of hyphae. So we can further classify hyphae by looking at figure 31.3. Figure 31.3 is something that I would suggest you look at to understand the types of hyphae that I'm about to go over. The first one is called septate hyphae. This is a class of hyphae. And then there's also another one called cenocytic hyphae. Cenocytic hyphae. So let's do septate first. Septate hyphae are defined as the following. These are hyphae divided into cells by cross walls. So hyphae divided, so they're sectioned off, they're compartmentalized. I like to use that word actually. Hyphae divided into cells by cross walls. Cells by things known as cross walls. And I'll explain what that means in just a second. So there's a compartmentalization here. If you look at the figure, what you'll notice is that you have distinct septa. Septa is the first part of the septate, and these distinct septa regions will also be seen, S-E-P-T-A, will also be seen with distinct pores within them. There will be pores. So septa are going to be regions plus these pores, and these pores are there because of the following reason. The pores are necessary because it allows organelles and cytoplasm to flow through. Allows organelles plus cytoplasm, and I'm going to get into the cenocytic side, but that's okay. Allows organelles plus cytoplasm to flow through. So really, I can't do this justice in terms of explaining what this means. Look at figure 31.3. You'll see what I mean by this individualized septa region, and then the pores are in between the septa to allow things to just flow through, because we have these compartments, these septate regions, and thus we have to have communication between all of them in this large multicellular organism, and thus we'll have these pores also there. So septa and pores make up our septate hyphae, okay, our basic building block. So a bunch of these will create a septate fungi. Now, the cenocytic side of the story is the fact that in this situation, the fungi are not divided into individual cells. So they're not compartmentalized, not divided into IND for individual cells, but instead, these guys are actually one big cell with many nuclei. One big cell with many nuclei. So you should be able to look at a figure without any labels and be able to tell whether something is a septate hyphae or whether something is a cenocytic hyphae, because it's very, very clear when you look at this figure the difference between them. So that's our subclassification of hyphae, the types that are seen. Look at figure 31.3 one more time. Now, another important multicellular structure, part of the fungi body, is something known as the mycelium. And this is something that we'll go over in great detail as we move forward as well. The mycelium. These are tangled mass of hyphae. So a disorganized mass of hyphae, tangled mass of hyphae. Of what use is this to the fungi? Why would this structure be necessary? This is going to create a vast and expansive feeding network. The whole idea of fungi is to continue to grow in such a manner that you increase, something that all of biology really wants to do. It's a rule of biology, that law of surface area to volume ratio. If you can increase your surface area to volume ratio, you can increase your absorptive capabilities. If you can increase your absorptive capabilities, you can increase your capability to eat, to feed. And if you can do that, you can grow faster, you can be more successful. These are all critical components to fungi success, to increase that surface area to volume ratio. How can you do it? You can use your hyphae, you can extend your hyphae, but then you can also use something called the mycelium. The mycelium is a greater tangled mass of hyphae forming this expansive feeding network. I'm going to get into that a little bit later as we move forward. So this is basic body structure in terms of getting food and classifying the ways to get food, septate and cenocytic methods, let's say. Another important type of multicellular structure would be anything that's involving the reproduction of fungi. We haven't talked about that. So there are also reproductive structures on fungi as a part of their multicellular overall body structure that are important. These fungi, one thing you have to understand is that they utilize spores for their reproduction. And we're going to get into those details in separate flowcharts devoted to reproduction. But for right now, just understand the basic premise behind spore production. Because if you utilize spores, you have to make spores. And if you make spores, you have to utilize reproductive structures within your multicellular body of your overall structure. In spore production, we have two types of basic methods. We can either use aerial hyphae. Remember, hyphae are the functional building blocks of all fungi. And so if you have these fungi that have hyphae that are exposed to the air can just flow through the fungi and release these spores through like wind patterns or something like that. So that's the way that you use aerial hyphae. These are extensions up towards the open air that allow spores to just flow with the wind, essentially. We can also have something that a lot of people know about, which is a fruiting body. We can also have this method. A fruiting body is simply equal to a mushroom. The top of a mushroom. Everybody knows what a mushroom looks like, hopefully. That is essentially its large reproductive structure. That is a complex. This mushroom structure is a complex, multicellular. Remember how I said we're getting more and more complex in our study of life? This is definitely a very complex structure, as we'll see. Complex, multicellular repro structure that not all fungi, a lot of fungi possess. Classic mushroom structure that you see is a fruiting body that is dedicated to spore production. We'll get into spores a little bit later. Just know the general types, aerial hyphae, or the fact that you have a fruiting body. Finally, last thing about multicellularity is the fact that we have something also different structure altogether known as haustoria. Haustoria. Look at figure 31.4b for a good focus on haustoria. Haustoria are specialized. This is a term we're going to start seeing a lot now. Specialized hyphae, meaning that they have evolved to do a specific role, a specific multicellular based role, specialized hyphae that penetrate host tissue. So that penetrate host tissue. So who do you think is probably going to be using this? Probably those parasitic fungi, maybe even the mutualistic fungi, so long as they give back something after this exchange of nutrients, let's say. Haustoria are going to be especially useful and seen for the fact that they are used to extract, take away, or sometimes exchange, because it could be mutualistic, couldn't just be a one-way transfer, nutrients with plant hosts. We're going to see that plants and fungi really, really either like each other or really, really hate each other based off of the fungi present and the plant present. So with plant hosts. So look at figure 31.4b. You'll see these very specialized hyphae that are dedicated to penetrating the host to get and extract or exchange nutrients with the plant host. Lots of information here, I understand. But get the big idea, big picture. Remember hyphae. Remember that hyphae can be subclassified. Remember the mycelium devoted to increasing the surface area. There are reproductive structures. We'll get into those details later. And remember the specific haustoria.